So we finished talking about the Gilded Age and some of the characteristics that were happening in the late 1800s, and we talked about the overproduction, the industrialization, the immigration, the urbanization, right? And all of those things are going to create social classes, and you're going to have, you're really impoverished, you're new immigrants. You're homeless, you're day workers. These are the people that are most vulnerable. You're going to have a working class who are often on the bubble of being impoverished, right? Where they end up having to have most everybody in the family working, including children. They often live in crowded tenements, and they're always really struggling, right? You'll have, because industrialization requires supervision and management, you do have the growth of a middle class, and this middle class tends to be professional. They're not independently wealthy. They have to work, but what the type of work they do is what we now call white collar, which is really kind of this idea that they're the lawyers, the doctors, the teachers, the supervisors, the accountants, all those kinds of things, right? And so, women in the middle class, so working class women and impoverished women are always incredibly vulnerable, always having to work. They don't really get to fulfill kind of these visions and ideals of womanhood, right? But middle class women do. They focus a lot on their home. They focus a lot on their family. Lots of volunteerism, and kind of expressing themselves that way. You start to have education being very, very popular with this particular group, because an educated woman can be more supportive to her husband and for her children and such. And so lots of interest in that. And the wealthy, of course, they typically live the farthest out. The men are the ones who kind of are whose money is making money for them, that own the businesses. Their wives are either kind of kept in a gilded cage, so to speak, with really strict gender roles, or there are a couple of exceptions where you have a wealthy woman who becomes very active in women's suffrage or in unionization. But typically, they have lots of servants. For them, it's a very different lifestyle, right? They don't have to worry about making all of these decisions. So you have the Gilded Age produces these very kind of set social classes. And what's going to happen is that your middle class, right? This is that picture of the dead horse I was telling you about, right? And this is why, like the settlement house movement is going to be very concerned about, we don't want to have the political machines in charge of cleaning up these neighborhoods. Like the settlement house movement is going to try to do that. A lot of your middle class reformers are going to see that kind of thing, kids left unattended and trash and lack of sanitation, and they're going to be bothered by it and upset by it. And they're going to say, you know what, we really need to do something else. And so they're going to push back against that. You've got... the middle class family up here, again, very much about management, about running your household. And then you've got very much the upper class, women who have these beautiful dresses and go to parties and all that kind of thing. So again, you have kind of this intersection of people, and it's going to be the middle class that will drive a lot of this. Now, part of this is because you've had some economic panics, Panic of 1893, then later the Panic of 1907. By a panic, I basically mean a depression. The economy contracts. People lose their jobs. There's not enough money. People aren't buying things. And so these panics kind of cause people to question the system, especially when they're looking at the ridiculously wealthy men like Carnegie and Rockefeller and that kind of thing. Literature also kind of promotes this reflection. And progressivism is not going to be a single policy, right? Progressivism is a bunch of different reforms meant to regulate the economy, meant to clean up government. That's really what it's about. And again, trying to balance the concerns of the different groups of people, right? And kind of get rid of that corruption. A lot of these reform movements, a lot of the progressivism believes in people having a capacity for good. This is where education comes in. And there starts to be this idea that maybe that social Darwinism isn't really isn't really the best way. They start talking a lot about social gospel, where the middle class contributes to making changes, and a lot of kind of motivated by this Christian ideal and that kind of thing. So this is kind of the origin of the progressive movement. Kind of sets us up, and again, all of this is responding to the rapid changes of the Gilded Age, the technology, the job competition, the frustrations of the farmers and the workers, the poverty. I said industrialization, immigration, and urbanization. Those are the big things that kind of cause this push towards reform. And as we move from the 1890s into 1900, there's a lot of interest in kind of changing society. And so that's why you have the progressive era coming after 1900. Of course, some of this is tangled up with imperialism, this idea that we're going to go help other people. We're going to help teach people, we're going to help civilize people, and that kind of thing. We're going to clean up corruption in other countries. That becomes a driving force as well. So all of these things are kind of the reform movements that come out of the Gilded Age are tangled up with these other ideas that we see.